First, you gotta download it. One important thing to know is that the corruptor needs these picture files that the corruptor comes with in order to run properly. You see, they're just like the banners and the icons and stuff. The corruptor needs these, so don't move them. Keep them all in the same folder, or it won't work. When you first open the corruptor, it's just completely blank. Right, you haven't selected a file yet, so let's do that. You can press Alt plus F on your keyboard to open up this window, or you can just go to File and choose File. Whatever works. But once you're here, this is where you choose the file that you want to corrupt. So you just hit Select File, and you can select a file, right? You can go to the desktop or whatever. I'm just going to choose the README file, because why not? And then here, right here, this box right here, this is where you put the name of the new file that the corruptor makes. The Scrambler doesn't corrupt the original file that you select. It makes a copy of this file and corrupts the copy, so that way your files will always stay safe. The corruptor doesn't even touch the original one. It copies it and only corrupts the new one. So we'll name this hi.txt. And you don't need to put this file extension in. If you just leave it as hi, then the corruptor will automatically add it in. But you can put it in. It doesn't change anything. So whichever you prefer. This box right here can also be a file path. So if you want the file to be created at a specific location, like on the desktop, for example, then you can just put a file path here, like c://desktop/g.txt or whatever, right? It doesn't really matter. You can put whatever. I'm just gonna put hi.txt though, just to make things simple. Okay, so now that we have the file selected, we can select which algorithm to use. And it doesn't really matter in the beginning because we're just learning how to corrupt, so I'm just going to choose the randomizer algorithm. It's one of the simpler ones, so I'll just choose that. Now you gotta fill in all this lovely stuff. Don't worry, it's not complicated. So let's start with the start value. The start value is simply where the corruptor starts corrupting in the file. So if I put a 5 here, that means that the corruptor is going to start corrupting on the 5th byte in the file. If I put 10, it'll start corrupting on the 10th byte, and so on. It's just how far into the file the corruptor starts corrupting. So for this, I'll just put, I don't know, 15, because we're corrupting a text file. It's not too important. Now the end value. The end value is similar to the start value, except it tells the corruptor where to stop corrupting. So if you put 30 in here, the corruptor will go from the 15th byte to the 30th byte and stop there. Everything else will be the same as the original. If you don't know what to put here, you can just select auto end here, and that'll set the end value to the very end of the file that you're corrupting. Usually you just select auto end. It makes things a lot easier. Don't worry about the ink value for now. That's not important. Now we have to set these values. Again, these are, you don't really need to know how these work, it's just how things get corrupted, so if you want you can just hit the random buttons and it will put a random value in there for you. And for these, just leave it on linear for now, that'll keep things simple. And then once you're happy with everything, come down here and press corrupt. And you will see that our file, hi.txt, got created. If you don't put a file path in, the file will be created in the same folder as the Scrambler, but if you do put a file path in, it'll go wherever you set it to. So let's look at our lovely file here. Well, you can see that's, this is our file before, you know, lovely text file, and after. So you can see, very powerful file corruptor. What is that? So yeah, this is the power of the Scrambler. It's great. Okay, so that's how you get started with corrupting. And if you want, that's all you need to know. You can just always hit the random buttons for these, and then just let the corruptor do its thing. And that's all you really need to know. Just messing around with these values, you will, you'll have a pretty good time with this. Yeah, that's the basics. Yay! So depending on the file that you select and the values that you put in for the corruptor might take a couple seconds to actually do its thing. Here, let me actually give you an example here. So for instance, if I put a very high exponent here and I hit corrupt, you'll notice that the window here freezes for a second, and I can't do anything. And it might even stop responding for a second. But that's okay. You see, after a while it will come back. That's just the corruptor doing its thing. Okay, sometimes it freezes like that because it takes a while to chew through the file, but don't worry, it hasn't crashed. But if it stays like that for like, I don't know, a minute, then yeah, maybe it crashed, but most likely it didn't crash. Okay, so now I'm going to go over the different algorithms that are on the Scrambler and tell you what they do so that you can select the algorithm that's best for your file, or whichever one tickles your fancy, or whatever. It's all up to you. So first, the incrementer engine. This engine simply takes a value and adds it to the bytes, and that value would be the add/subtract value here. So essentially, it'll go to a byte, and it'll add this value to it, whatever you put in here, and then it'll jump, and then it'll go to the next byte, and then add this, and then go to the next byte, and add this, and so on. So it's very simple. If you've used the Vinesauce ROM corruptor before, you know how this works. Very simple. Next is the randomizer algorithm. This one will take the bytes that it lands on and randomize them, so that it'll give you just any random byte. So that means that every time you use this algorithm, it'll give you a different result. So that makes your life even easier. Then we got the Scrambler algorithm. This one is kind of hard to explain, so just look at the animation on the screen. It'll make it more clear. So essentially, it'll take a byte, it'll jump forward, it'll take another byte, and then it'll swap those two, so that the first one will become the second one, and the second one will become the first one. And then it'll jump, and it'll do the same for the next two, and then jump for the next two, and so on. So it's just switching bytes around. That's all it's doing. Next we have the copier algorithm. This one will land on a byte, jump forward, land on a second byte, and then replace the second byte with the first byte. Or the other way around, depending on if you put a positive or a negative number here. So that one's pretty simple. It's very similar to the shift feature on the Vinesauce ROM corruptor, or shift byte, I forget exactly what it's called, but it's similar to that. Then we have the tilter algorithm. This is essentially the replace feature. Is that what it was called? The replace thing on the Vinesauce ROM corruptor. Whatever byte it lands on, it will replace that byte with whatever you put in here. So if it landed on like a 60, it'll replace it with this. And then if it lands on a 50, it'll replace it with this, or whatever. You can also set this algorithm to replace only specific values. So let's say I put like a 55 here. That means that the corruptor will only replace the 55 bytes that it lands on. If it lands on anything else, it won't replace it. It'll keep it the same. So in order to use that, you just gotta check this. If this is on, then it'll only replace this value. If this is off, then it will replace everything. Kind of confusing, but just mess around with it a little bit and you'll see what I mean. Then we have the mixer algorithm. So basically what this one does is Okay, so now I'm going to go over all the specific values here and teach you what they all mean so that you can use them to their fullest potential. Okay, so starting with the incrementer engine. Actually, no, we're starting with all of them because all the algorithms have this inc value. What does that do? Well, essentially, whatever number you put in here, so like 45 for instance, that is what will be added to these values when you click these buttons. So you can see this is going up by 45. And if I right click, it'll go down by 45. So that's just to make corrupting a little easier. This isn't required for corrupting, it just makes your life a bit easier. This also works with negative numbers as well, in case you were wondering. Block size. So block size is essentially the amount of bytes that the corruptor will corrupt at one spot, essentially. I'll put another animation on the screen to make it make sense. But if I put block size to 1, it'll only corrupt 1 byte per jump or per area. But if I put 3, it'll corrupt 3 bytes per jump. So it's a good way to deal with more bytes at one time. Then we have the block space. And the block space is how much space goes in between these blocks. So if I set this to 1, there will only be 1 extra byte between corrupted bytes. But if I put it to like 4, then there will be 4 uncorrupted bytes between each corrupted byte. Again, I'm not that good at explaining things, but hopefully the animation should make it make sense. Then we have these 3 buttons. What do? Well, linear, that's just the normal block space. That's the one that I just explained. Now, exponential, if you have this selected, then the space between corrupted blocks will get bigger as it goes through the file. And this number determines how quickly that space gets bigger. So if I put this at 2, for example, then it'll get big, but not as quickly as like 4, for example. 4, it'll get bigger much more quickly. So, of course, putting really high numbers in here, like 34, it'll make the space get really big. So, yeah. Again, the animation makes sense. And then random, that'll switch this to upper bound. The random switch will essentially put a random amount of bytes between each corrupted byte. And the upper bound tells the corrupter what is the most amount of uncorrupted bytes that can go between corrupted bytes. So if I put this at like 10, for example, that's probably going to corrupt a lot, right? Because the most amount of uncorrupted bytes is 10 per corrupted byte. So it'll, probably corrupt a lot. But if I put this at 1,000, for example, then the gaps will be much bigger and it won't corrupt as much. So the lower the number, the more the corruption. And then the add and subtract, I already explained that. That's just what gets added with this algorithm. And then the scrambler. The scrambler and the copier have this block gap value. That essentially tells you how much space goes between the swapped or the copied bytes. So on top of the block space, which tells you how much space goes between these corrupted blocks or whatever, this gap tells you how much space goes between the swaps or the copies. So it's like an additional spacing. Again, the animation will make sense, but if I put it at 1, then these bytes will be really close, right, when they get swapped. But if I put it at 4, then there'll be a much bigger space between them. So that's what that does. It's the same with the copier engine too, except it gets copied instead of switched. Then the tilter algorithm. I already explained what the replace and replace with does. Replace with is what all the bytes get replaced with, and replace, when this is selected, this will be the only byte that gets replaced. And then the mixer algorithm, it actually has this really secret feature where if you... Okay, so now we're going to go over some more stuff that's up here on the options and whatnot. So, under File, you might have noticed the Save Preset and Load Preset buttons. Well, what do these do? Well, let's say you've used the Scare Scrambler for a little while, right? And you found values that work really well with your file. And you want to save them so that you can use them later, or you can share them with your friends or whatever. Well, all you have to do is go to File and Save Preset. It'll ask you to name your preset, so I can just name it GGG, and hit OK. You'll notice that a new file gets created called GGG, and that would be our preset. And essentially this is, these are all the options that you have put into the Scare Scrambler, and that's just a way to save them. So now that you have this preset file, it'll actually automatically open whenever you open the Scare Scrambler. See, when I open it now, the exact same options that we put in are still here. And it also saved the file name and the file that you selected too. So you don't even need to do that. It saves everything. But if you don't have the preset in the same folder as the Scare Scrambler, then it won't automatically open. And you'll need to load the preset. And it'll just ask you to find it and open it. Just like that. And if you try to open something that isn't a preset, you can see it won't let you, because I'm a good programmer. So yeah. Excuse me. Now we're going to go to options. So hexadecimal mode is pretty simple. essentially this will let you use hexadecimal numbers for these values. So you can see, A1, 1B, 1C, 0C, AD, whatever, right? It'll let you use hexadecimal numbers. And it'll also let you do like, no, I can't use negative for that, but like add and subtract, you could do like negative 5b, and that would work. You can do 5.ff for there, because exponent is the only one that you can use decimals with, so you can put a decimal there. You can also use capital letters too for the hexadecimal values. It doesn't really matter, it just automatically uses lowercase letters, but both of them work. You can also use it up here too, or whatever. Kids! Yeah, if you don't know what hexadecimal numbers are, then keep that unselected, and it'll just use your normal decimal numbers. And then we have dark mode. Dark mode just turns dark mode on, and it looks cool and stuff. So if you're corrupting in the middle of the night, then you probably want dark mode on. So just choose whichever one you want. And then we have the info window, which just has info on the project. Pretty simple. And now some super secret pro tips from yours truly. So, certain file types are really hard to corrupt. For example, exe files. They're a nightmare. So, if you want to just get into corrupting, I don't recommend corrupting files like that, because they are really difficult, and even I can't get them to work that well. So just keep that in mind, and don't get frustrated if you can't get good results out of a certain type of file, because maybe it's not good for corrupting, right? Corrupting is a very trial and error thing, so if you fail at first, just try again. You'll get good at it eventually. It just takes time to learn what kind of values work for specific files, right? It's just something that you just keep at it, and you'll get good at it, unlike my talking. And sometimes you'll notice that when you corrupt a file, like an image file, for example, a .png, when you go to open it, it'll say that you can't open this file. That's just because you corrupted some data at the beginning of the file that's important for Windows or Mac or whatever to... Actually, no, it has to be Windows. Haha, no Mac version. That's just because you corrupted some info that Windows needs in order to open that file. So if that happens, then just, let's say your start value is at 100, set it to something higher, like 500. Because usually, if you set your start value higher, then the corruptor will ignore all that important stuff at the beginning that it needs to work properly. So just avoiding the beginning of a file is a good way to ensure that it'll work properly, is all I'm trying to say. And sometimes you might notice that if you go to corrupt, you'll get an error like this, saying that the values you entered were not valid. And just like it says on this window here, oh, that button's black. Oh no. It looks good on dark mode. I'm gonna have to fix that. Okay, well, I'm glad I found that while I was recording. Anyways, if you get an error like that, just make sure that all the values are actually filled out, right? That's usually the problem. And if the values are filled out, then make sure that the values that you put in were actually valid. So for example, like, sometimes negative numbers don't work, or, see, you can't put decimals in that one, so don't do that. Stuff like that. Make sure that all that stuff is good. And lastly, mess around, see what works. Certain things will work better than others, right? Certain values. Like, exponential. Usually you don't want anything over like 10 for that. So, I don't know. It just depends on what kind of results that you want to get. Sometimes you want a really small block size, other times you want Other times you want a really big block size. So just mess around, see what works and what doesn't, and just have fun with it. That's the whole point of corrupting, just to have fun. So, yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. With those tips, you'll become a BIOS corruptor in no time.
Thank you for your call. Goodbye.